Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin tonight's public roundtable, may I please ask you to place your mobile phones on silent. Tonight we will be live streaming this discussion from International House Facebook page. We welcome and encourage you to ask questions via the comment section of the stream, which we will endeavour to have answered during the Q&A session. After the discussion has concluded, the recording will be available on our Facebook page or on our website. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Messel Lecture Theatre at the Sydney Nanoscience Hub of the University of Sydney. Tonight's public roundtable discussion is "The World Coming Together or Falling Apart" is being hosted by International House in collaboration with Sydney University International House Alumni Association, in celebration of our 50th anniversary. Firstly, I would like to invite one of our outstanding resident students from International House, Brianna Watson, to give an acknowledgement of country. Brianna.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start, I must acknowledge that we are on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. Dirama delanya badu waradru. Di yidama gadabu dal. Narang bangbu. Gadagu badarangang. Dari Eora Nation. Mirambo yiri yarambang. I am a proud Wiradjuri woman, and I'd like to pay respect to the Gadigal Nation of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation country. And I would also like to acknowledge that we are meeting on their land today, and what we are doing is spreading knowledge and enforcing learning. Thank you.
Thanks, Brianna. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jessica Carroll. I'm Director of International House, which is a residential college owned and operated by the University of Sydney. The House, as part of its mission, fosters international understanding and friendship among its diverse community of resident students and alumni from around the world. Our residents have the opportunity to live and dine together at round tables on a daily basis and to have meaningful discussions about real-world issues. And this roundtable discussion tonight fits very well with our mission. I'm delighted to welcome you here tonight, and I hope you will enjoy the diversity of views and input from our wonderful panel of speakers. Now, to officially open the event, it is my pleasure to introduce our Vice-Chancellor and Principal, Dr. Michael Spence. Dr. Michael Spence, AC, is the university's 25th Vice-Chancellor. He has led the university with distinction since 2008. An alumnus of the university, Dr. Spence graduated with first-class honours in English, Italian and law. His other languages include Chinese and Korean. Dr. Spence lectured at law at the university and worked for the Australian Copyright Council prior to departing from Australia and establishing himself at the University of Oxford in order to undertake doctoral studies. At Oxford, Dr. Spence was awarded his doctorate in philosophy and continued to develop his career over the next 20 years. He became a fellow at St. Catherine's College and a lecturer of the University of Oxford in 1992. He also obtained a postgraduate diploma in theology. After a period as head of the law faculty, he was appointed as the head of Social Sciences Division, one of the 4 divisions that make up the University of Oxford. Dr. Spence is recognised internationally as a leader in the field of intellectual property theory. His work includes articles and books on intellectual property law and the law of obligations, with a critical focus on suggested ethical and economic justifications of the existing regimes. Under his leadership, the university has forged its distinctive strategy. The University of Sydney's 2016 to 2020 strategic plan aims to maximise the university's great strengths: depth and breadth of disciplines, a commitment to challenge ordinary thinking, and a genuine desire to do good in the world. In January 2017, Dr. Spence was awarded a Companion of the Order of Australia for his eminent service to tertiary education. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Michael Spence.
Thanks very much, Jessica, for that very fulsome introduction, and thank you, Rihanna, for your acknowledgement of country. I also would, of course, like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to say that here at the University of Sydney, people have been teaching and learning for tens of thousands of years, that is something of which we are incredibly proud at the university, and think all Australians should be proud with us. Well, it's my great privilege to welcome you here this evening, and in doing so to congratulate International House on 50 remarkable years, and the Alumni Association on their support of the work of International House. And as we think about the next 50 years in the life of International House, I think it's important to acknowledge that this kind of activity has never been more important for us as an institution, nor more important for our country and our world. We are a remarkably diverse institution. We now attract about 36% of our students from overseas, which is rather different to 1967. They come from around 140 plus countries, though of that 36%, about half of them come from the People's Republic of China. It's a very diverse student body, and yet it's also a very diverse student body, of course, too, amongst the many different cultural and linguistic backgrounds that are represented in our domestic student populations. But we're a big institution, 63,000 students and about 10,000 staff. So it's very possible, if you're a student at the university, to commute in and mix with people from your own subculture, whatever that might be, and commute home again without spending as much time as we would like encountering the other. So places like International House that encourage precisely this kind of conversation, our student organisations, the work that goes on outside the classroom as well as inside, is incredibly important in making sure that as we produce leaders for the Australia of the future, we produce leaders that understand our community more generally. But of course, International House was founded at a time when the memories of the Second World War were still fresh. It was founded at the height of a Cold War, when people knew we just had to talk. And I don't know, and presumably I will know after this evening, but I don't know, but it appears to me that we've forgotten the pressures of those times, that we are in serious danger of forgetting the importance of bringing people together across boundaries of difference. The importance of doing that not only for our shared prosperity, but also for our shared security. So activities like International House, those things that the university has been committed to for 50 years and longer, bringing together potential leaders, not only from Australia, but from around our region and around the world, and putting them in contexts like this, where they talk about our shared problems and our shared future. Nothing is more important for the mission of the university. So congratulations to all of those of you who have participated in the life of of International House over a long period of time. Congratulations to Jessica and to the Council of International House. Thank you to Rotary for its long-standing cooperation with the university in the running of International House. And on behalf of the university, may I say that we are looking forward to thinking about how the International House tradition is very strongly preserved for the next 50 years and beyond. I unfortunately have to slip out just before 8 o'clock to go to another event. But welcome this evening, and I'm looking forward very much to hearing the roundtable discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Spence. And we're delighted that you could make it tonight and open the event. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Simon Longstaff, AO, Executive Director of the Ethics Centre, who will lead our panel discussion tonight. Simon's distinguished career... Oh, you don't...
No, I'm fine.
Okay, well, I think we all know he's had a fabulous career, and I'm going to hand over to Simon, and he's going to get this discussion going. Thank you, Simon.
I didn't mean to be rude, but thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this. I'd also like to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and any of their elders, and to acknowledge a culture which, for tens of thousands of years, education was both lifelong and compulsory. So it's worth remembering it here, and I think Michael was alluding to that here. For those of you who might be watching this on a webcast or want to, you can go to a Facebook page for International House. You'll see a little link there where you can watch it live, or you can make comments, and those comments will be transmitted through to the moderators, and eventually a subset of questions or comments that you make will turn up on this iPad, and I'll be able to use the miracle of technology to be able to convey them to the panel. Tonight's session is a mixed mode of engagement. Part of it is about drawing on the great experience of this diverse and interesting panel, who each have some time to make their own remarks about what they think about this question. And then we're going to have a conversation, much as like you'd hope that people might have around a dinner table, if we were sitting over there in International House, and then throw it open for questions and comments from the floor, or as I say, by those who are watching from a remote place. Just as I passed on having the full biography read out at the beginning, we've all agreed that you can read about each of the panellists either in the papers that have been provided to you or online. But just briefly to introduce each person, in case you don't recognise them, going around the table, we've got Jeff Cousins, who amongst many other things is currently President of the Australian Conservation Foundation, Professor Jackie Troy, who's a Yarragoo woman from New South Wales Snowy Mountains, but he's here as a professor and director of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research within the whole of the university. Jamal Rifi, who is a doctor, very much involved in human rights within the community. Dorothy Hodnott, who is Pro-Chancellor of the university, but in her day job is the principal of Holroyd High School, and has been again intimately involved in issues to do with human rights and the rights of refugees. Richard Dennis, who is now Chief Economist and formerly the Executive Director of the Australia Institute, and Helen Zoki, who's the Chief Executive of Oxfam Australia, and again has similarly got a long experience in community development and human rights. It's a diverse panel, obviously. You can tell I represent the youth voice. Just joking. Right. We had a bit of a talk about who's going to go first. Now, you'll have to, as an audience, actually look at them with a gimlet eye if they go too long, because I said they can have no more than 5 minutes, hopefully slightly fewer than those minutes, to try and help us set the scene as we think about this question. Are we coming together or pulling apart? So, Helen, away you go.
Good, thanks very much. Can I also, first of all, apologise to you people, because I've got my back to you, but I don't think I can do much about that. Can I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land? I think language is the theme for NAIDOC Week this week, so it's lovely to have that acknowledgement in one of the many Aboriginal languages. Can I also thank International House to invite an outsider in, University of Melbourne, University of Tasmania, so I feel like that's a great privilege, just snuck in there. This is a great topic. So I'm going to actually start with a bit of an optimistic bent, and just to give you a kind of sense of where I'm coming from. My evidence base is really twofold. The first is that Oxfam is a global organisation, as many of you would know, and the way that we work, amongst other things, is to believe that if we're going to get real change, you have to work on big issues. So we do international long-term development work, we do humanitarian response, but we're a campaigning international NGO. And in doing that, we get to stand beside people in many countries across the world where I see incredible human resilience, and I'll touch on that. The second is that at a personal level, my husband and I, between us, we've got 8 children between 27 and 38. And so we have a ready-made focus group for any issue, because as everyone here would know, young people between 27 and 38 don't have opinions, they just know. And so I have this group, plus their partners, as the group that keeps me pretty well grounded. And it's because of that, and really what the Vice-Chancellor said, that at the end of the day, the world isn't going to fall apart because there are human beings in it. And I think we don't have the luxury to not believe that human beings can make a fundamental difference and a change. And I'm reminded of this every day when I walk into our offices and see people who've chosen to come to work for Oxfam, and I can tell you it's not for the pay, it's for the values base. But I'm also reminded when I meet with people, and the one story I just want to tell, I recently came back from South Sudan. I mean, what a tragedy of a history in terms of the country. Beautiful country, amazing people, completely lost opportunity. Decades of conflict. And we have national staff working there, so staff from the southern part of South Sudan who at the moment are probably facing, in terms of their own community, potential genocide from the conflict in South Sudan, who are shifting their families into Uganda. And I said to Julius, this young man who's working on our program, is there ever any hope? And he said, you always have hope. You always must believe that we can make a difference. And that's what I do when I come to work every day, up in Unity Province where the famine is. And it's what I believe is actually going to change. So that's the pitch for the optimistic picture. We have some wicked problems. Global nationalism is rife, but and that forces us to be inward-looking. So that's why we need the connection with people to be outward-looking. We're building walls. We've got the potential of the wall, another great wall that might take decades before it can be brought down. My Canadian colleagues say they want the wall built up there, but Donald Trump wants to build it in Mexico. We have a widening gap between the rich and the poor, and that means there is capture of power, and we have to challenge that. We have climate change that some others will talk about, no doubt. Climate change is one of the biggest barriers to people actually being able to move out of poverty. But it's going to be a driver of displacement of people, which is the fourth big challenge that I want to really draw attention to today. Millions of people who are displaced because of conflict, because of economic changes, and increasingly because of climate change, because they won't be able to stay where they are.
Okay,
so that's my four propositions, but I'm optimistic. Thanks,
great.
Simon.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, again, apologies for anyone who I have my back to, and a confession. I was a student at this university quite a few years ago, and I never graduated. I haven't told anyone that before, but
Your secret's safe with us.
I went off to become a school teacher, and I never returned. I do apologise. So to have somebody sitting at this table who doesn't even have a degree seems rather disgraceful. Now, I want to give you a quote from the President of the United States, which is not a popular thing to do at the moment, mainly because we seem to have a buffoon as the President. But listen to this quote. I was raised in a household in which the only intolerance I was taught was intolerance of bigotry. We must never remain silent in the face of bigotry. In all quarters and at all times, we must teach tolerance and denounce racism, anti-Semitism, and all ethnic or religious bigotry, wherever they exist, as unacceptable evils. Well, that obviously wasn't the president. Who was it? Was it John F. Kennedy or maybe even Bill Clinton? No, it was a Republican president. It was Ronald Reagan, the great hero of the Republican Party over the last many decades. And the interesting thing about that is not only the content, but the form, because it's a statement of values. It's not a political statement connected with some policy or something of that kind. It's a statement of fundamental human values. And in answer to the question, is the world falling apart? The answer is, in the political system, yes, it is falling apart, because there is a vacuum of true values from the political leaders of the world, quite clearly from the President of the United States. But if you go to our own Prime Minister, He was asked in a seminal essay by Annabel Crabb, when he was the leader of the opposition, the quarterly essay, 10,000-word piece, what his core political beliefs were, and he gave a 4-word answer. I am a pragmatist. I am a pragmatist. In other words, I believe whatever is useful at the time is useful. In this vacuum, however, the hope is this, and we were talking about this before we came in, that vacuum has been filled by other people, other groups of people, NGOs and others. The one that I head up, for instance, the Australian Conservation Foundation, when I joined 3 years ago, we had about 100,000 active supporters and members. Today, 3 years later, we have nearly 500,000. And most of them are young people. And most of them are coming on because they want that vacuum filled. That's the hope, the power of the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Dorothy? Yeah, feel free to applaud if feel inspired. Just don't do all his, you know.
Oh, right. I thank you to International House for inviting me. I was on the original student committee, which started the idea of an International House, and because I was an English student, I got to be honorary secretary of that of that body. So if you've got your record somewhere, you may find my very awful handwriting documenting the doings of that student committee.
Beautifully spelled, no doubt.
Correctly spelled. I'm good at spelling. So I am what you might call a sort of a pessimistic optimist, and that's because when I look at the world, I see a lot that's very wrong and getting worse. And then when I work at schools, I see the hope for the future, which is such an essential part of education. But I'm a school educator. That's where I've been. I'm a teacher. And my school is the school that I've worked at for the last 21 years as principal, is a school where 65% of the kids are in the bottom quartile of socioeconomic status. 60% are from refugee or refugee-like backgrounds. Almost half of them have been in Australia less than 3 years. I've got 1 in every 12 students is an asylum seeker. And one of the things that I've been doing in the last few years is lobbying the universities to provide scholarships for young people who make the grade at the HSC from that extraordinary level of difficulty. I'm glad to say Sydney University has risen in a wonderful and generous way to that challenge, and there are now about 8 young asylum seekers here at this university studying, because otherwise they would have to pay full international student fees and couldn't pay those things. So when I think about the world coming together, I think about the power of young people and the hopefulness that education is. And then I think about some of the things which are happening around the world which are not so good. Because a lot of my work has been with disadvantaged children, I think about the complete abrogation of the rights of children that's happening in so many countries. There are the UN estimates something like 130 million children who never go to school. 70% of those are girls. The majority of illiterate people in this world are females. This came home to me when the government decided to tighten up the immigration and citizenship rules recently and put in an English test at a level 6 on the IELTS scale for people who were prospective citizens of this country. That's a university entrance level. And I know that has immediately disenfranchised all of those remarkable, brave, feisty Afghan and African women who are the mothers of the children at my school, who will never be literate because they can't ever achieve the sort of literacy that's required. But they come to English classes at the school, and they came to our Mother's Day breakfast, and they come to learn about what it's like to manage a teenager in a new society, but they won't be able to become citizens under these rules. And that this sort of discrimination that's levelled against the poor, against women, particularly against people who are powerless to speak out and articulate their own aspirations and wishes. That's something which I see as very serious. There are something like 65.3 million displaced people currently in the world. That's a huge number of people. 51% of all displaced people are under the age of 18. The reality of that, and something like 22 million are displaced outside their country. They're refugees. In 2015, which is the last year that there's accurate information for, only 102,000 people were resettled out of that vast diaspora of suffering. And only 220,000 went back home. Some of those people have since left because of the resurgence of things like the Taliban. The reality is that if we've got 65 million people who are displaced, half of those are children, most of those children will never go to school. Most of the people who are displaced will never be resettled. Their lives are spent in the limbo of suffering and of deprivation. A small number manages to come to this country, and the one great redeeming thing for the children is that they must go to school. Well, mostly they must go to school because not all jurisdictions admit children on temporary visas to public schools. New South Wales does, but there are issues even there. But in all, I think that it's what we do in schools is actually taking people who've been through extraordinary challenges to everything that you might imagine, that anyone in this room might imagine, and giving those children the chance to go forward into the future. It's very powerful. A number of years ago, there was a young girl at the school who was an asylum seeker. She was on a temporary protection visa at that stage, and she was one of the students who bravely spoke up to the first Human Rights Commission's inquiry into children in immigration detention. So she was asked to speak at the launch of that report. And Nahid Karimi is her name. She later became the sort of the origin of the main character in a book by Libby Gleeson called Mahtab's Story. Some of the younger people here may have read that book when they were at school. And Nahid spoke at this launch, and she said that she'd learned three important things from her schooling. One was the right to an education. The second was the right to freedom of speech, which she was exercising at that moment, even though she was at risk being on a temporary protection visa. And the third was the right to be yourself. And I think that really in a nutshell sums up what education is about. Right to be yourself, the right to move forward, the right to an education.
Thank you. Jamal.
Well, Simon, aim to have a confession to make. I suffer from blind, incurable optimisms. Definitely, the word always, a human being in the whole world have been challenged. And the way they respond to that challenge, it either make us, break us, unite us, or divide us. I am lucky because I always meet people that they will always give me a vision that the push factor is one thing, and it is 1,000 times stronger than the pull factor. When we're talking about a few issues that made a lot of changes recently, I was thinking about terrorisms and racisms. They did impact on us in many ways. I was thinking about the Islamization of terror and the dehumanization of refugees. I always believe, and I still believe, that terrorism and racism are the two sides of the same coin. They feed on each other. And we have seen a lot of pull factor recently. What's happening in the Middle East, and particularly with ISIS, and also one of the pull factor, what's happening between the Israeli and the Arab world, or between the Sunni and the Shia. These are a lot of pull factors that's affecting many people, except the push factor is even stronger. We'll talk, I had some discussion with some people in in Melbourne and in New South Wales about the Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. There is a project that's called Rosanna Project, where volunteers in Jerusalem itself, they drive every day to the wall and they wait for patients that come in from the Gaza Strip and cross the crossing border, and they get into the volunteers' car and they'll be driven back to Jerusalem, where to Hadassah Hospital they will have their treatment, and then the refugees, the actual volunteers take them back into the border because the Palestinians could not afford the cost of taxis, and for them to cross by car takes a long time. So that is something not many people will hear about it. And there is human-to-human interaction. It's very, very strong and existed for many years. And except, unfortunately, the media does not highlight it. Now, we all heard about the saying that not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. And to be honest, I've heard it times after times, except that statistic is totally the reverse. And I can quote many statistics, but like in Europe, Europol, only 2 years ago, they actually issued their annual report, and they found 94% of all terror actions that's taking place in Europe were non-religiously motivated. They were mainly by separatist group or ethno-specific issues that in Europe, or even in the state. The FBI themselves, they did a lot of studies, and they came to the conclusions that the majority of incidents that have taken place, they were not religiously motivated. One of the things which stuck in my mind, we all heard about the Boston Marathon bombing. 3 people have died, and that's in 2013. At the same time, in the state, toddlers killed 5 people by accidentally discharging a firearm. And I'm not trying to minimize the fact that what we have witnessed is something new, but it is new to all of us, Muslims and non-Muslims, Middle East and foreigners. It is something that we truly believe as a Muslim that it does not represent our religion, does not represent our community. But unfortunately, there is that business model by the media where anything that's something to do with the Muslims, you highlight it, you talk about it, and it's like saying, this is the evil, we are the good. And when other things happening, like what happened in Norway in 2011, when probably a lot of people were in one incident, they were killed. Nobody to nominate that person or gave him the names like he's a Christian terrorist or anything like that. It was covered at that time, but it was not covered in the same way as any other incident usually is covered. And that is one of the pulling factors, except there is a lot of actually pushing factors. Regardless of what the media is doing, what we need to do is actually, this is appealing to everyone in the international house. Let's think behind and beyond the headlines. Let's think and let's actually think is not just what we read, but it's what's actually the human-to-human interaction rather than the headlines. Thank you.
Jamal.
Well, I'd like to say that I was absolutely delighted to hear Wiradjuri spoken today. Thank you very much for welcoming us here, and also for the acknowledgement of the use of the language of this area. Has many names. Where we're seated here is Gadigal. This week our languages matter. I hope they continue to matter way beyond NAIDOC week. It's wonderful to have that theme. So I guess my thesis for is the world coming together or falling apart? The language world is to a degree falling apart, But the good news is that we Aboriginal people, in fact Aboriginal people from all over the world, whatever the denominations or colour, creed, code, whatever you want to say, are doing what we call in Australia in Aboriginal English chucking a hand back. So we're chucking a hand back to help all of the rest of you. In Aboriginal English we say that is to reach back as you see somebody faltering or falling, to grab their hand and hold them. And I have to say I have had my hand held as I occasionally felt I was faltering as a new professor at the University of Sydney by my wonderful Muslim assistant from Pakistan who speaks 5 or 6 languages on a daily basis. So quite an inspiration for someone like myself who believes in stopping the world's languages from falling apart. We are losing our linguistic diversity on a daily basis. There are about 7,000 or so Indigenous languages around the world that are struggling to keep going. Australia used to have 389 languages, is the latest estimate, spoken at the time when the country was invaded in 1788, actively spoken on a daily basis by everybody, whether they're old or young. We now have about 150 or so that still have speakers that grew up speaking the languages. We have 13 that are still strong. So Australia is linguistically falling apart from an Indigenous languages point of view, but again the good news is we're sticking our languages back together and we're getting a lot of help from the education system. There is now a national curriculum that says we can, it shows how to teach languages. Any school in Australia can teach one of our languages. We just need to train the people to teach the languages, preferably Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but there are a lot of non-Indigenous people in Australia who are really interested and really keen. And I'm pleased to say Sydney University is trying to take a bit of a lead in this space. It's my alma mater too, as we're all fessing up to which universities. I did my honours degree here in linguistics anthropology and never looked back. We are looking at developing a degree course where people can come and study an Australian language in a bachelor's degree at Sydney University into the future, perhaps starting as early as 2019, getting some of these units going. So I think, you know, the world is losing a lot. It's losing a lot environmentally every day. It's losing a lot politically. I think Indigenous peoples are not well led necessarily, but we as a group across the world are really truly coming together. I travel a lot. I have travelled a lot for many years into other Indigenous communities, and everywhere I go, I feel immediately at home. There are characteristics about our communities because we chuck a hand back. I think a lot of what we've heard tonight actually is about experience with Indigenous communities. You know, in war-torn West Bank, in the Middle East, we have people who are Indigenous people looking after other Indigenous people, and no doubt anybody else that needs someone to chuck a hand back too. So I think maybe in some ways the health of this planet may actually come down in the end to people listening to what Indigenous people have got to offer, and I think that's happening more and more, irrespective of what our colour, creed or code might be.
Thanks very much, Jackie. Richard Dennis.
Well, thank you. Look, I just keep looking at that question. I think, well, when an icebreaker hits a sheet of ice, is that a coming together or a falling apart? And I think that the question really, well, I think the question questions itself. If this was a debate, I think it would be a complicated one. One of the reasons people think Australia is falling apart is because it's become so diverse. One of the reasons people think Australia is so great is because it's become such a place where people come together. The reality is the world is ever changing, and the parts that are falling apart are, for some people, baggage that needs to be shaken off, and for others they're fantastic traditions that must never be lost. And sometimes it might be both at exactly the same time. I mean, the coming together in 1788 was not a happy event for those diverse cultures, many of those languages that have now been lost. But have other good things come from that coming together? Well, we're sitting here tonight in one of the richest countries in the world, at the richest point in world history. So I think it's a fascinating question to be asked. Are we coming together or are we falling apart? Well, it's the coming together that drives some things apart, but it's also the coming together that brings things together that might not have ever been, interacted with each other, whether that's technology, whether that's culture, whether that's people. I'm an economist, so apologies for that. We're not usually the group that bring people together. But when we look at the economy today, when we look at the economy of the future, you hear so much fear, understandable fear, when people talk about things like technological change, be it driverless cars or robots taking jobs. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty for people to fear. But if we look back 100 years, 30% of Australians, 30% 100 years ago, worked in agriculture. Today it's less than 3%. But not many people think of themselves as unemployed farmers. In fact, that was back-breaking work at very low pay. And most farmers today would probably rather drive a tractor than have 100 people standing next to them with a hoe. But at the time, the tractors displaced unskilled labour. Was that terrifying? Yes. The question for a society is how, if at all, do we come together during those times of change? Do we help those who inevitably bear disproportionately the costs of moving from manual labour to tractors or from call centres to robots? People lose their jobs, people get sick, people become disabled. The question is how, if at all, do we come together during those predictable events? Australia's history, Australia's modern history, has defined itself through stories of mateship and that coming together. But for the last 30 years, we've suggested that that's unaffordable in the modern era, and we need to catch and kill our own. The devil take the hindmost. These are choices. These are choices we get to make about the kind of society we want to live in. These aren't economic questions. These are cultural questions. These are values questions. We get to ask ourselves whether we want to pull together or fear the other and push other people away.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. A fascinating range of things and all sorts of interesting connections that come together. Look, I want to do something that Richard was sort of doing about looking at this question, because it's slightly tendentious, isn't it, in its language. It's either coming together or falling apart. What if it had said, is the world coming together or growing apart? A much more constructive notion that people are finding local communities, little identities where they're defining themselves and things like that. Would we be worried about that or celebrating it? Jeff?
Well, I want to return to the proposition I was trying to put in my very brief remarks, which related to the values that exist. And that might sound like a bit of an airy-fairy concept. Values, I mean, what's that got to do with people?
This order section of the event, don't talk to them. They're just going to listen to you talk to us. Okay? just to explain the thing. So
well, I just like that better. Yes, that might sound like a bit of a sort of a warm embrace rather than anything real. But let me give you a quick example. I'm a businessman, really. I mean, I've done a lot of other things, but most of my life has been running companies. Not long ago, I was on the board of one of the biggest companies in Australia. And at that point, we had a CEO who had terrible values. Didn't like the customers. Didn't even like the country. Didn't like anything very much, and no one liked him either. the impact on that company in real terms, in terms of its profits, of its return to its shareholders, in every possible sense that you could think of, and indeed particularly in terms of its biggest asset, namely its ability to hold customers, which is usually a big asset of most companies, fell away. That gentleman left, and a new CEO came in, one of the best CEOs I've ever seen, a person of true, decent value.
Okay, so
everything ticked up.
Okay, so Helen, I mean, one of the things that came through here was that if this diversity is going to be something which is for the good that we've been talking about, it's going to require people at least to let go some of the fear which we're talking about. And one of the ideas that I think we should explore is whether or not people would be a hell of a lot more comfortable if they felt the leadership of the country, whether it's in institutions, in government or the private sector. We're more grounded than just being, oh, I'm going to be a pragmatist.
Well, I think I mean, this is going to be a brave statement, so just let me get it out. I think we're seeing some green shoots of hope, which have come out of the mess. And I think out of this time there will be a resurgence of different types of movements, which is about people connecting and people from, lots of different backgrounds connecting. So if you think about the reaction, and this is where I think feminism and the women's movement is going to be really critical. So you think about the first response to Trump was the women's marches. That were men and women standing in solidarity together. You think about, so that's one point. So
and here, the green shoots?
Well, I think the green shoots are happening here as well. I was going to give you another example of that as well, which is, again, a bit of a brave statement. But because the political leadership is not there, it means that leadership does have to come from other sources. I think that the community mobilisation in Australia will start to lift its head, but I also think the business community, if you think about something like climate change, is actually saying, oh, for God's sake, I mean, if you can't make decisions about this, then we will group together and start to drive some of this agenda. And I don't think we should underestimate that there will be leadership that comes in different ways, which means that we also have to suspend disbelief. Is that the expression?
Yeah, so what you're really describing, both of you, is that this fractured ice sheet is an opportunity. It's a lovely one. Thank you, Richard. But it's an opportunity, and that because of it, it's going to force a reaction in which quite unexpected alliances will begin to be formed by people in business, not-for-profit world, universities, Indigenous community. Do you, I mean, you talked about the Indigenous community coming together around the world. Do you get a sense of green shoots here too in Australia that people can respond to?
I do. I think, we really are starting to, as a country, embrace the fact that this country has an Indigenous present. It's not just the history. It's and
a gift in the sense of present.
Yeah, and that what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people know about this country, everybody needs to know actually if people are still prepared to share it. So we know that the environment was created by tens of thousands of years of careful management, and in less than 200 years actually it was stuffed up. So all these beautiful pastoral lands that were so attractive to the first industries in Australia of grazing stock were all destroyed pretty quickly, because in grazing stock and not setting fire to the place anymore, trees took over. I love trees, but they have their place, and not all over these big open country areas that we created that made it such an attractive place. The business of environmental degradation through mining, and very little return to communities. Money goes back to communities. In the Northern Territory in particular, I've had some involvement with the Land Rights Act and the mining royalties that go to communities, but there was never a plan for how communities might really benefit from those royalties. You're handing big chunks of money to people for whom it's, when he gumdrops, I'll go and spend it, and then there's nothing for the future. So I think this country is starting to look at ways in which to, manage the lives of all people in a better way. But there is also this very worrying development where unless you speak English, not just speak it, but speak it to a degree that a lot of people wouldn't even be bothered speaking it to, actually, whatever it means. I mean, what is English anyway, except a kind of mixed language, which unfortunately we all have to speak. But it's it's kind of crazy that we are starting to set up these divisions between people based on language use, but then also what people want to believe in, what people want to wear, what they might want to... Fortunately, we don't discriminate on what we want to eat. Australia's really embraced multiculturalism, and that's a good thing. I'm really, really happy with it. But it's just, I think that's the flaw that's, for Indigenous people across the world. We're part of this sort of, well, look, we want to get all your knowledge and get you to help us sort of do things, but we don't really want to, back to this point of embrace you for who you really are. We don't want you fracturing that ice. We want the ice to sort of stay there.
So you think it's a very conditional relationship still?
It is.
Give us what we want, the nice art and songs and things like that, but we're not going to see you as you are. And if you jump in.
It's interesting though, Simon, that in some of these big issues like climate change, which is obviously something that I'm intensely interested in, both the Indigenous community and the business community, as Helen raised, are way ahead of the politicians on these issues. I mean, I can tell you, I was on the board of the biggest insurance company in Australia, and 15 years ago, that company changed all its homeowner policy ratings in Australia based on climate change science. So the cost of everybody's homeowner policy, well, not all, but mainly down the East Coast, where the climate scientists were predicting higher winds, bigger storms, hurricanes coming down the East Coast, everybody's policy.
But do you see people consciously joining together, not just an odd coincidence of interest, but an actual movement to look past the politics and to form coalitions of shared interests?
I don't see that so much in the business community, I'm afraid to say. I see individual pockets of it. The business community is very hard to bring together.
Yeah, but look, I do see it myself. I can give you an example. In the last 2 years, we have been meeting very regularly in London, and there is an idea project. Anyone can see it online now. It's called Inclusive Australia. And we identified a lot of issues, and we thought that everyone in our community, in our society matters, and we have been working on, it's going to be launched very soon as an idea, and it is a strategic idea that we're going to keep on working on it for the next 20 years. And it's called Inclusive Australia. So yes, I can see a lot of people have identified a lot of these discussions, even and they came together and from different walk of life, and they coming with something strategically. I mean, this is only one example. I can tell you many other examples that where people are coming together. And in of the Islamic faith, I just been fasting the months of Ramadan, and I have gone to an iftar if I wanted to every day of the Mass. I mean, we haven't been invited this year to the Prime Minister, but
don't you think that tells you something? I mean, that is a really interesting point.
Well, it is.
You make light of it, but
no.
There was an invitation, and look at it, it was turned into a political question.
Well, it was, but because what happened is, I mean, if we're looking at leadership at the political level, for us not to have an iftar this year, after the iftar that we had last year, that didn't show any leadership, didn't show any guts. But that's why we're talking about ground level leadership and community-based leadership, because there is a vacuum at the top, and vacuum, nobody's going to like it. And probably, I'm very happy for the masses to fill it in and to give direction. And I believe many organizations, many ideas, like Inclusive Australia, will give direction to the politician where they need to go, in the same way as now our Aboriginal sisters and brothers, they are given direction to the politician where they need to go.
Richard, I mean, there's the optimism is lovely, but is it naive?
No, I mean, if we look back through history, societies have overcome far bigger challenges than we in Australia face today. I mean, 100 years ago we were fighting World War One. This was not really well, sure, people were coming together. But
yeah, because of a common enemy.
No, I meant the countries were coming together to fight each other. To kill
but also in Australia there was a common enemy and there was notions of empire and everybody rallied around. So, I mean, it's a very different situation.
Yeah, but this is my point, that it's easy to tell ourselves that this is the kind of the biggest challenge that we as a nation have ever faced. I just don't think that's true for a minute. Again, we're sitting here today at the richest point in time in world history. From a material point of view, the world has never been a richer place. In Australia, depending on how you measure it, is in either the wealthiest or in the top 3 wealthiest countries in the world. But most Australians feel poor. We're told we can't afford to help people suffering from disadvantage because, quote, we can't afford it. Well, frankly, if we can't afford to do it in Australia, who in the world could? How is it that 50 years ago we could afford to do things that we can't afford to do today? So, no, I'm optimistic for what we could do. That's different from being optimistic about what we will do.
And on the what we will do side of things?
Well, look, we're talking about... I
want to be a bit sober here about fairies in the garden.
No, we've been trained to have very, very low expectations of our democratically elected leaders. The word politician is a pejorative. Mm-hmm. No, it is. And you can't actually have a democracy without politicians. So the next time you find yourself talking about how politicians are, insert word here, you've just said democracy's crap. That's a big call. I never lump all politicians in together and talk about them. Because if they are all hopeless and they are all corrupt and they are all incompetent, we'll give up. I don't think that. I don't think that at all.
Except Jeff is saying, I think Helen too, that they may not be those things that you describe, all hopeless, all incompetent and corrupt, but their failings at the moment are forcing a process of democratic decision-making outside the traditional areas of power.
Yeah, look,
maybe places like International House.
Well, also, I think Richard says, we're not facing the biggest challenge. We've faced bigger ones. I don't think that's right, actually.
Well,
I think the biggest challenge, which is coming, is the one that Helen alluded to earlier. The displacement of people in the world over the next few decades will be of such a massive dimension, and it won't be economically driven. And it won't be driven by ideology or religion. It will be driven by absolute necessity that millions of people will simply not be able to survive in places like Africa and some other parts of the world, and they will move. And Peter Dutton, standing in a uniform with a leather baton under his arm up in the north of Australia saying, ships to the east, ships to the west, ain't going to stop them. No government, no war, nothing will be able to stop that. The only thing that we will be able to do about it is to consider with compassion and planning and thought how to derive a benefit from it, rather than ignoring it and trying to push it back because it's a tide that won't be able to be pushed
back. Just a couple of last comments on that point, and then I'll throw it over to the audience. Helen?
Well, I was going to go down a slightly different path.
So, Richard, do you want to say something in response to it?
Look, I think that, and I'm sure you probably mean this as well, combined with or made worse by climate change.
Yes, well, that's...
Yeah, but again, post-World War II, we saw hundreds of millions of people moving around the world. Yes, we face enormous challenges. I'm just saying that no one in the history of the world has been better resourced, if they wanted to be, to meet those challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I heard what you said about us being rich, but the wealth is not distributed equitably. Australia is a very rich country. It's one of the richest in the world. And we have one of the widest equity gaps of any OECD country. Of the 39 countries, I think, in the OECD, we're something like third from the bottom in terms of equity. So one of the issues for Australia has to be the distribution of wealth and the concentration of power in the hands only of some people, because it's quite clear that that's becoming a division in our society. I hear the political class talk about the civil society at the same time as the pragmatism that they claim. A politician said to me the other day, I'm not a conviction politician, I'm a pragmatist.
Yes.
Come on. When we have people who are taking that line and are putting into place in our country policies which actually exclude people and prevent them from participating in our common weal, then we are in trouble. I think that we have to say that all the wealth in the world will not save us if we produce injustice in this country to an extent that young people feel so disenfranchised that they take to terrorist acts to express their frustration and their despair at what's happening. And there are disengaged young people in our community now who are in exactly that position. They are poor, they are badly educated, they are hopeless, they are in a state where they don't feel included at all in our society. That exclusion is going to rip us apart. We really do need to think about that. Think about citizenship.
So if I synthesise this, really we're getting to a point when we start to go to the audience where we're really talking about, Dorothy, strengthening the common bonds within this country to have even half a chance beyond our wealth to meet the kind of challenge that you and Helen have been talking about. Okay, look, let me remind you, yes, just 1 second, Jackie, I'll say to people that we're here celebrating the 50th anniversary of International House with this public roundtable. I'm going to come to you in the audience in a moment. If you're watching online and you'd like to submit a question, just go to the comments section, put that in there. But before we do, you'd like just to make a quick comment before we go? Yeah.
My quick comment is that what Australia needs to learn from is the internal refugees, that would be us. So the Aboriginal people, particularly of Australia, are refugees in our own countries and have been right from the start. And we are also people who don't have to ponder on how it is to work together or fight homelessness and joblessness or economic disadvantage. There was none of that before 1788, and that is absolutely the case. So again, where are the seats in Parliament for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who we should be governing in this country? The wisdom we've got in our communities is something that this country would really benefit from. And if there's going to be any kind of constitutional change or recognition of sovereignty or any kind of a treaty, we need something that puts us front and central as the empathetic philosophers with real ethical values that this country needs.
Thank you. So, if you'd like to ask a question or even make a brief comment, that's fine. There's a microphone down here. If not, we'll just be chatting amongst ourselves. But anybody who'd like to contribute about how you see this? Yes. So, yes, there's a. You've got someone up there, have you? There's a gentleman down here. Just if you raise your hand again so they can see.
Jeff Cousins, thank you for your comment about the whip and the jodhpurs. I might suggest that the person you refer to looks more like General Rommel than, more like Commandant Clink than General Rommel. However, my question for you is, do you think Peter Dutton, in the light of what you said, is looking more and more like a latter-day King Canute?
I'm not sure I want to spend too much time on Peter Dutton. To be honest with you, that was a passing comment, but and I take Richard's point very strongly about not just attacking politicians as individuals, because I did have a period in my life where I was giving some political advice and I got to see politicians at a very high level, and they are very hard-working people, and it is a very difficult job and not one that I would ever contemplate going into. So I think, in a way, we need a better system for getting great people into politics, or maybe in this country, a bit of what they have in the US, where an administration, a new administration, can bring in lots of people from outside without them having to go through years of being a backbencher and all this kind of thing. We don't have that in this country. So we have a bureaucracy which is pretty static, and then a whole lot of people come in, many of whom don't really have much of a background in understanding these kinds of things. I have no idea how you would change that system, but I think it would be an enormously positive thing if it was possible.
I also think we've got to do more ourselves as citizens to create fertile conditions
Yes, absolutely.
for the kind of leadership. It's all very easy to hang a person out to dry because they changed their mind, but if they've got good reasons, we shouldn't say, "Oh, gotcha." We should be actually saying, "Oh, thank you. That was good. If you'd do it." Anybody else want to have a? Okay, the gentleman down here. Maybe some ladies might like to jump in too. Two blokes so far.
Well, thank you all for your comments and your discussion this evening. As an alumnus of IH, I'd like to say, actually, I spent 3 very enjoyable years there as an undergraduate, and the thing that really we celebrate in IH is diversity. Getting to understand people who come from different parts of the world, from different parts of Australia, and seeing that different perspective. And it's a shame maybe that so few of us are actually have had that experience, have been able to see it. And I think it's something really worth celebrating. The other thing I'd say is that I very much am taken by Dorothy's comment. Inequality is the big problem that is facing the world. Many other problems we can solve in one way or another, but it's inequality that's going to drive these immigration problems that really are going to increase. As a resident of the UK for the last most of 2 decades, I've watched that place become less and less equal. I look at Australia and I see it's heading in the same direction. Both places seem to aspire to the levels of inequality that the US has, and I think it's a disaster. It's a disastrous way to go. We seem to be driven in this direction by the economic systems that we have. And I take Richard's point that, yes, the world probably is now a better place than it ever has been. It's got a pretty awful history in most respects. And yet, have we got the right kind of economic system that is actually going to lead us in a sensible direction? Because I see it heading in the wrong direction in the UK and in the US, and I'm afraid that Australia will possibly go in the same direction as well.
Thank you. I'll say that as a comment. We've got some questions that have come in here, and so before I go there, this is picking up on something from you, Jamal, because you were talking a lot about the human to human and these unknown acts of crime, like the people picking up people and bringing to hospital. So Wei-Shen Wong asks, in regards to whether the world is coming apart or falling apart, coming together or falling together, where does change start, on an individual or an organisational level?
Look, I definitely believe change starts on individual, family, community, society. And and it is in this order. But sometimes people or even community, they may have some fogginess about where they stand and where they want to go. I experienced that in my own community a couple of years ago when the start of ISIS did happen. And we stood still for a short period of time, not knowing what the hell is going on, where do we stand, what's going to happen. But then suddenly that fogginess disappeared. And we had a clarity of vision. And people, they have realized that what's been happening in the name of Islam, it was mainly a political hijacking of Islam itself. And we had a battle for the soul of Islam, and we need to win that battle for the sake of the humanities at large. And I reckon we are winning. I believe it is individual, family, community, and societies at large. That's the way I see it.
Thank you. Just brought up in the green.
No,
Yeah, Helen, this
while
is
we're
regular.
waiting for
Yeah.
the microphone to get there, I think that, you know, the other thing that we really need to be conscious of at the moment is the role of civil society, and, you know, however that's defined, because that's often where you do get the voices of the, you know, the aggregate individual voices of groups that are coming together. It's often where you get the braveness that sometimes, I mean, it's such a critical part of the democratic process. The democratic process is not just about politicians, it's about how the voices of people come up. And, you know, that's something we need to be vigilant about here in Australia, where, like other countries, that space has been closed down. We've seen the legislation of environmental groups, and we, you know, really need to make sure we keep that open so that those other kind of influences are coming up through that democratic process.
There's certainly a
in
moral
Australia.
courage required in these times for people to speak, even though the pressures that we remain silent. I should also, before we go, just acknowledge from Sayan Mitra, who asked about the role of the International House in these sorts of things. I think, sir, your description of your own experience and what impact that made was a very fine answer to that question in anticipation. But yes, please.
I'd like to sort of move back to the question of where does change start? In my professional work at the moment, we're looking very much at the rollout of the NDIS in Western Sydney, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And I know from my university experience that did start with people who did feel very underrepresented and disenfranchised, but very quickly did escalate to the political level and very quickly became economically difficult to substantiate and difficult to sustain. So I guess my question is it detrimental to start off blind in terms of the political and economic commitments to trying to deal with these grassroots levels? And is there a way that we can breach the gap between the people who are starting the conversation and the people who are implementing the policy?
I didn't quite get it.
So the NDIS, I think, is a step forward, and it follows the acceptance some years ago of standards around disability provision. It doesn't apply to everyone. Young asylum seekers are not included in the NDIS. We're struggling at the moment with a profoundly disabled girl with cerebral palsy in year 12 at our school, who is also in community detention, and she won't be covered in any way when she leaves school at the end of this year. We're trying to work out what to do to help her, because she certainly has benefited enormously from education. I think the first thing to do there is to use that word inclusion, and we should not be excluding people with disabilities from participation in society. We need to be starting with education. The very divisive comments made by Pauline Hanson only last week about isolating children with autism from mainstream classes has not been helpful. Those comments have not been helpful at all, because they say they're a generalisation for a start, that all people with autism should not be in mainstream classes. It's like saying all people with arthritis shouldn't be in mainstream classes. We can start excluding all sorts of groups immediately. But we have I mean, don't get on to arthritis. We have integrated autistic children in the mainstream classes in the school. We have children in wheelchairs. We have special classes for children who need to be in those special classes. Education is right at the core of a lot of these things, whether it's acceptance of disability or acceptance of difference of one sort or another, acceptance of Aboriginality or acceptance of different views of what gender are.
But don't you think on that point, I mean, Samir Murthy asks whether or not things are actually heading in the right direction, and they talk about, women, LGBTIQ people being, I mean, there seems to be society over time, on the face of it at least, is becoming more inclusive rather than less inclusive, or do you think not?
No, I'm not so sure about that. I think we're more aware of the needs to include people. That is the thinking part of the population. But it always seems in certainly in education, you're one step forward, maybe two steps back in this regard. So it took a long battle to get children with disabilities included in mainstream classes. But there are some children who should be in specialised classes with specialised, very intense support. And there's no doubt about that. Doesn't mean that the other children can't be. We have children in, we have some autistic children in our specialised classes who also are integrated into mainstream classes, things like maths. And they go in with the teacher's aid into those classes, and that means that the other children are not impacted by strange behaviours and so on. I think we need to learn to accept that there's a range of things in the community and be more tolerant of those. But it's so easy to put people into little boxes and then to exclude them.
I can also hear Jackie's comment earlier on. Yeah, included, but on whose terms?
Yeah.
As we actually are, or on the terms that you require us to be.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of politeness now in Australian society overall, and when in fact people, Pauline Hanson, where do you start? Yeah. I did actually write a piece last year saying around about this time, Ramadan, and I was like, 3 cheers for Pauline Hanson, because she's suddenly got this focus on another group who actually seem to be reasonably robust, but she's not looking at us Aboriginal people for once. But it's this sort of
nice work.
Thank you.
The trouble, the mention of her name brings me back to the point that you raised, Simon, that this is a time when voices need to be heard, and yet there's a lot of pressure to silence them. And the mention of Hanson's name, I think it was a shocking thing when she came back into the Parliament in the first place. But worse, and I was one of the first people in this country, her first time around, to call her a racist and a bigot. But when she came back the second time, did the people who had seen that shocking behaviour before, the condemnation of Aboriginal people as not being underprivileged, the country is going to be overrun by Asians and so on, did those people who observed that condemn her when she came back? No, the statement from the Prime Minister of this country was she ought to be respected because she got so many votes.
Well, what do you think she's speaking to? Denise North sent in a question asking about how you just find sometimes in small communities by the other. I mean, why is she finding a constituency at this point in time? Is it just that there's a lot of bigoted people, or is it the fear that Richard was...
It's the fear. It's the fear.
It's inequality. I mean, let's be clear, Pauline Hanson didn't cause Hansonism and Donald Trump didn't cause Trumpism. Inequality did. What they are very clever politicians who show up and speak powerfully to vulnerable groups and say, I feel your pain, I understand your loss, and it's Dorothy's fault. I hate to say, when we attack the people who vote for Pauline Hanson, or when we attack the people who vote for Donald Trump for being afraid, we just reassure them that we're out of touch with their lives.
Absolutely. Just on microphone duties, the one here and then down the front. Next.
I think you were first if you want to go first.
It's okay.
I'm gonna.
We'll both get to speak. So.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question for Dr. Jamel, if that's okay. Before you brought up the Boston Marathon, a lot of us here are students at Boston University, so thank you for that. But you brought up the example between the Boston Marathon and another tragedy that happened, killing 5 people, and just showing the difference between that and how terrorism is being really framed on Muslims. And I was wondering if you could kind of shed some light on why you think that's happening and what is the driving force of that, and how we can relate that back to what's driving the world to be torn apart instead of pushed together.
Okay, thank you for the question. First, let me just make the statement that we should realize that terror actions, if it is individual or collective, domestic or global, it is to be condemned and has no place in any civil society whatsoever. I gave an example And the reasons why, I just needed to allude to the fact that I'm aware of a report in 2014 by North Carolina University where they documented post 9/11 how many people were killed, and they have found that probably 74 they were killed by Muslim terrorism, while 190,000 they were murdered by gun. Just needed to put things into perspective, because right now worldwide media is focusing on the issue of Islamic terrorism, and they making it like is an existential threat to all of us. Well, in reality, it is a threat, but there are bigger threats that we needed to face, and they are passing a lot of legislation. This legislation, it impinges on every and each one of us, and they make it this like the issues all being seen through the prisms of security rather than humanity, and that's one of the reasons led to the rise of right-wing politicians. And Hansons and Trumps, they didn't blame Dorothy, but they blamed Jamal, that's for sure. Yeah. So, when you have the other who is different from you, and there is hate, and then people will actually start to believe it, even if it is minuscule rather than in a bigger scale. So that's
particularly when it's linked to ignorance.
Yes.
But just on one point, I think it's really important to be careful in these conversations about suggesting moral equivalence between different things, because whatever the source of terrorism, whatever its motivation,
yes,
the deliberate intention to kill large numbers of innocent people can't be compared to deaths of other kinds.
Can I just read a newspaper headline?
Yeah.
This is from yesterday. US, 28 injured in Arkansas nightclub shooting. Police say incident not terror related. 28 people shot in a nightclub by a non-Muslim. Made the event not terror related.
So one more, Jackie, and then we'll go. Yeah.
I'd just like to offer that Aboriginal people are the subjects of economic terrorism. I mean, terrorism, obviously, terrorism as a thing can take a lot of different forms, but worldwide, more Aboriginal people, Indigenous people, kill themselves every year than anybody else. And we're talking very young Aboriginal people worldwide. And this goes back to all these issues of inequality. Inequality that comes from being economically unequal. But then on top of it, there are other kinds of terrorist activities that are perpetrated on our peoples, including in Australia, the intervention. I mean, what was the Australian government thinking? Let's make people who already feel really bad about themselves feel a lot worse and call it a good thing to do, you know? So I think to me it becomes really strange that a religion and people who follow a religion, and there are such diverse people across that religion for a start, are terrorists, when in fact governments perpetrate acts of terror, even the best intentioned governments.
Some deliberately. Last question or comment.
Thank you very much. Several people have talked about inequality, and I agree that's a major issue. I'd just like perhaps Richard and Jeff or anybody to reflect on the connection between inequality and values, which has also been raised, and economics. And the particular thing I would like to ask Richard, as someone who extremely briefly decided I needed to try to become more economically literate than I was, I may have been badly taught, but it seemed to be a very value-free discipline. And I wondered, is there any move among economists to take on board some of the values that we're talking about, so that economics, in some milieu, economics is treated almost as a values system, so that if something is inefficient, it's bad.
Okay.
So that's
think of the substance of it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask you to respond, Richard, because of time, rather than anyone else.
Yeah, look, inequality is a choice. Inequality is a value. There are countries in the world that are far more equal than ours, and there are countries in the world that are far less equal than ours. Their democracies make successive choices. Now, I find one of the hardest things about being an economist who cares about inequality being trying to say to people like yourself, there is, and I'm choosing my words carefully, absolutely nothing in an undergraduate economics course that says inequality is good or bad. These are democratic questions, but our body politic, our public debate uses my discipline to justify inequality. Like my discipline, our role in society is to justify things. Right? So we have to cut taxes for rich people and cut spending on poor people to make the economy grow. Exactly. Let me be clear, there is no evidence to support this. There are a lot of well-paid economists to support this. But this is really quite a different thing. Now, I often, and I'll be quick here, I promise, Simon, but there is a country, in fact, there's a whole region of the world called Northern Europe that does exist. And what we know is it has much higher taxes and much more generous social wages and much more generous welfare systems than anyone who's ever seen a Volvo knows that they can and do produce things and indeed export them around the world. But we know in Australia, we just know deep in our bones that unless we cut taxes further and cut wages further, we won't be able to compete with China. Yet I assure you that Volvo exists and IKEA exists, and I've been to these countries. This is not fantasy. So my point is our democratic conversation has been crushed by people who love inequality. And all my discipline are the well-paid salespeople for that. It has nothing to do with economics.
And what's so sad? What's so sad about it is that one of the founders of modern economics, Adam Smith, was a professor of modern philosophy at the University of Glasgow, and said the system had to be based on reciprocity and sympathy.
But he argued against inequality.
He did, exactly right. That's what I'm saying. The sad thing is that the original foundation of economics was richly laden with ethical content.
And he also argued for regulation of business, which nobody remembers.
No, people don't read The Wealth of Nations or The Theory of Moral Sentiments.
I was going to say Theory of Moral Sentiments is a much better read, better written book.
Yeah, it's where the initial first appears. Anyway, let's not get on to... Look, to those who sent in questions, Lauren, Nigel and Nicholas, who I didn't get to, I apologise for not being able to do that. Just to bring this to a close, because the time has come to do so. I'm a pragmatic idealist. No, I have always thought of that. I think it's essential you have to have your ideals and the boundaries which can constrain what you do, but you also have to have an alive sense of the world. And I've been immensely inspired in a sense by the conversation. I think this notion that you brought about the cracking ice and the sense that it allows new forms of democratic engagement to take place, that we ourselves as citizens should be far more responsible for the kind of politics that we have in our response to the opportunities is really important. I think, Jackie, I'm still really taken by your expression about the ability to see people and accept them on their own terms, rather than seeking to require them simply to conform. And I think you can speak with a particular authenticity and authority about that as an Indigenous woman. But also the fact that ultimately something like International House, as we heard, I hope I'm not overlaying your words with too much of my own sentiment about it, but I got the sense that it really mattered to you. Oh, it did. That these conversations you had all those years ago, and you carry them through into your life, and that it's that human scale, Jamal, what you might say to people over a meal, you know, that level of things where you share and get to know people, that's an immensely powerful thing. So I hope that the International House continues on for its next 50 years, letting people sit around a table, have a conversation, share a meal or whatever, where you do actually see the person as they are rather than as you seek them to be. On that note, I'd like to invite Dr. Ros Madden to bring us to a close. And you're beautifully positioned with the microphone there, Ros. We're all part of the cunning plan.
Well, hello everybody. Oh, I might actually stand over here. It's not so glary. I'm Ros Madden, President of the Alumni Association of International House, and it's my job to try to thank people. When we began to plan this evening, actually I'll just come here because I'm trying to talk to the panel. We did have a vision. We had a vision of wise leaders sitting around a table, having a really stimulating conversation, and a conversation of people whom we admire very much because you have acted and taken action in difficult areas of our society. So we were quite ambitious when we issued our invitations to you, and we were absolutely delighted when you all accepted. So sincerely, thank you very much from International House and the Alumni Association. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you, Simon, for guiding the discussion so beautifully. And of course, also a big thank you to the audience who came out on a cold winter's night, and also to those who are somewhere online, and including a couple of people who apparently didn't get their questions answered. So thank you all very much. I also do want to acknowledge International House staff and alumni and residents who helped make this event a reality. Thank you also very much. I've been asked to mention our next fabulous 50th anniversary event, which is an art and history show, next Friday, where we'll be unveiling an absolutely beautiful painting by Bronwyn Bancroft for International House. Anyway, finally, thank you all for being here, and thank you very, very sincerely to the panel for a great discussion. And I'm so happy that it's been recorded, and you've given us a great deal to think about. Our dreams have been realised. Thank you.